All right, I'm ready. Give it to me. Oh, and a miss. One more, Jerry. Oh, swing and a miss. I was never really great at baseball. I loved to play, had a great time, had way more fun after the game with friends, having a beverage or two. Baseball players, there are some that are good. There are some that are great. Most who play baseball get to first base. They're some of the good ones. They get to first most times. Some are greater, and they get a double or triple. And then there's even those legendary home run hitters. Babe Ruth. Do you know that he had, I think, 824 home runs? He also had 1,432 strikeouts. Every one of these players, singles, doubles, triples, even home run hitters, every single one of them has a necessary part in the game, don't they? We swing for the fence. And how good you are depends on how much you've practiced, how well you play, and how much you put into it. It's always a matter of trying your best. Here in our scripture this morning, we have a bunch of players. We have Mary, and we have Martha, and we have Lazarus. We've heard about Mary and Martha before. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus is coming for a visit, and the two sisters have a very different approach to this visit. Martha is the pragmatic one, the practical one, the hands-on one. And she was excited to see Jesus. She wanted to do all the right things. She showed her love for Jesus by jumping in and doing the stuff that needed doing. She did the cooking, she did the cleaning, and preparing for this wonderful time for Jesus. And that was the way that she gave her best. Mary, she took a little more cerebral approach. She was more a sit back and listen, watch and learn, absorb everything she could approach. And in that way, she did her best. Lazarus, well, we don't hear much about Lazarus right up until this point. There are other references to Lazarus in the New Testament, but scholars generally agree that it was a different Lazarus. But in our story this morning, we hear that this brother of Mary and Martha has died, and they are absolutely heartbroken. And their nature comes to the fore when we see their approach to grief. Martha, the proactive, pragmatic one, goes out to meet Jesus right away when she hears he's coming. She can't sit still. She runs out to greet him, and she tries really hard to understand. She knows that if Jesus had arrived just a few days earlier, that he could have healed him. She knows this. She's heard the stories. She may have seen him heal people. She shows her faith in his abilities when she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She also shows her faith in him when she says, "But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." In this way, she is showing that she knows that Jesus is favored by God. And Jesus assures her, "Your brother will rise again." But here's where Martha doesn't get the whole game. She says to Jesus, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." You see, the Jewish concept of resurrection was radically different from Jesus' resurrection. During the time between the Old and the New Testament, the Jewish belief in resurrection really flowered. And there was quite a bit written in Jewish literature about resurrection. But nowhere does one find in the literature of ancient Jerusalem anything that compares to the resurrection of Jesus. This concept of resurrection differed in two fundamental respects. In Jewish thought, the resurrection occurred after the end of the world, not within world history. And two, it included all the people, not just one individual. In contradiction, Jesus' death and resurrection was within world history and was an isolated individual. One scholar says that Jewish beliefs about the afterlife prohibited anyone rising from the dead before the resurrection at the end of the world. Martha knew this. Martha was constrained and constricted and conditioned by first century Jewish thinking. She was faithful. We would say that she was a solid singles hitter. Mary, on the other hand, she starts with exactly the same line. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then she sits and waits to see what Jesus will do. She doesn't contradict him. She doesn't ask for an explanation. She listens and watches. Her allowance for what might be, what Jesus might do, is not conditioned and constricted by what the world thinks. And this allows her to step outside the first century Jewish thinking box, to stretch her faith and belief in who Jesus was, to believe in what could be. It allowed her to turn the corner towards the double. But there's another player here I don't want you to miss, and that's Thomas. Thomas is with the disciples when Jesus decides he is going to Bethany. Thomas, along with everyone else, knew how dangerous this could be. They said to Jesus, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? But Jesus is determined, and Thomas makes a surprising stand. He says, let us also go, that we may die with him. This is no fainting flower now, no doubter at this point. Thomas steps up and hits a solid triple. He's prepared to follow Jesus wherever it will lead, to whatever dangerous place that might be. And Jesus, this miracle is his swing for the fence moment. He puts everything into it. All of his emotions come to the fore. We read that Jesus wept. This is just about as impressive as it gets, raising someone from the dead. Everything is on the line here. You might say that the score is tied. Jesus and the Pharisees. Bases are loaded, and Jesus is the winning run. The one who will change everything. It's coming up to the 9th inning. In the very next chapter of John, just after what we've read, we start to get into the very last week of Jesus' life. The Passion narrative starts in just a few scant verses. We've got 2 out. It's a full count. And Jesus has to knock it out of the park with this one. And he does. He does. But there's a price to be paid for that. We read just after this resurrection of Lazarus, this last miracle, that the chief priests and the Pharisees start to plot in earnest to get rid of Jesus. They recognize his power, and they know that they have to shut him down. They have to strike him out, as it were. But Jesus never misses. Never misses. Even if some of the gospel writers miss. We've been talking about these miracles of Jesus in the Gospels, and he performed many, but this miracle is only mentioned in John's Gospel. And it really causes us to wonder, why is it missing from the other accounts? And the absence of this miracle in the other Gospels, well, it's because it's so extravagant, this miracle, that we wonder how they could have forgotten it. Jesus raised someone from the dead. He knocked it out of the park with this one. This is impressive. How could they have forgotten about this? But this is based on the presumption that a miracle of this nature, this extravagance, was unusual in the ministry of Jesus. But it isn't. He had raised others from the dead. Jesus brought to life Jairus' daughter, and we see that in Matthew and Mark and Luke. As well, the son of the widow in Nain was mentioned in Luke. But John doesn't mention any of those miracles. And Matthew and Mark, they don't mention the widow's son. There's good reason to believe that Jesus raised even more people from the dead, given John's clear statement in John 21. There are many other things that Jesus did. If all were written down, the world itself, I suppose, would not hold all the books that would have to be written. This is Jesus' last miracle, his penultimate sign of his greatness, the ultimate being his own resurrection from the dead. We human beings, like baseball players, some of us are good. We get to first sometimes. Some are greater. They get a double or a triple. And then we have those legendary home run hitters. It depends on who you are and how you play. But it's always a matter of trying your best, swinging for the fence. I have a friend who every Sunday morning sends me a text that says, "Knock it out of the park." And I always reply, "I'll swing for the fence." There's a story about Charles Spurgeon, who was this amazing preacher in the 1800s, like really amazing. They called him the Prince of Preachers. One Sunday morning, he had preached a magnificent sermon. People were flocking to him afterwards. They were greeting him at the door. They were telling him how wonderful it was, thanking him, professing their faith. And bringing up the tale was one young man at the last. And he came up and he said, "Sir, I am a young preacher, and I want to know how you do what you do. I preach every Sunday, and never do I have the responses that you do." And Spurgeon allegedly said to the young preacher, "Well, son, you don't go into the pulpit every Sunday expecting to change lives, do you?" To which the young man replied, "Well, no, sir." And Spurgeon said to him, "There's your problem." I always want to do my best for God, as do we all, I'm sure. Some of us are solid singles hitters, like Martha, hardworking, pragmatic, proactive, absolutely faithful, doing the work that needs to be done here in the church, in our families, in our lives, getting on base so the long game can be won, making it possible for others to come to faith with their efforts. But perhaps having a little difficulty with the tough stuff, the believing in miracles stuff, because 21st century says that that can't happen. Some of us are doubles hitters, like Mary, faithful, always willing to learn, being able to step outside the conventional 21st century thinking in order to deepen their faith, turning the corner, being hopeful for the next space, daring the pitcher to pick them off. And those people are necessary for our faith families, as they always encourage us to learn, to dare, to believe in what seems unbelievable. And then there are a rare few who are triples hitters like Thomas, willing to follow Jesus into the dangerous places, being willing to put their lives on the line for their God, being willing to slide face first into their faith. Like baseball, each and every one of us are necessary for our family of faith to flourish. Each one of us is essential for the church to grow and to thrive. Every one of us has a part to play in order for the Christian faith to be known in this world. Those who do the everyday work, those who challenge us to think, and those who hold nothing back in their effort to share the gospel. Always try your best. Always swing for the fence. Always know that you are important to the work of this church and this world. But know that it is Jesus Christ who always hits it out of the park. Jesus, who is at the center of our lives and our faith. Jesus, who is the star player that we rely on for the long run and the eternal game. I want to leave you with a story about baseball and gods that I found online. Bob and the Lord stood by to observe a baseball game. The Lord's team was playing Satan's team, and the Lord's team was at bat. The score was tied 0-0, and it was the bottom of the ninth inning with 2 outs. They continued to watch as the batter stepped up to the plate. The batter's name was Love. Love swung at the first pitch and hit a single because love never fails. The next batter was named Faith, who also got a single because faith works with love. The next batter up was Godly Wisdom. Satan wound up and threw the first pitch. Godly Wisdom looked it over and let it pass. Ball 1. 3 more pitches and Godly Wisdom walked, because Godly Wisdom never swings at what Satan throws. Bases were loaded. The Lord then turned to Bob and told him he was bringing in his star player. Up to the plate stepped Grace. Bob said, "Sure doesn't look like much." Satan's whole team relaxed when they saw Grace. Thinking he'd won the game, Satan wound up and fired his first pitch. To the shock of everyone, Grace hit the ball harder than anyone had ever seen. But Satan wasn't worried. His center fielder never let anything pass. He went up for the ball, went right through his glove, hit him on the head, knocked him out. And then it continued right over the fence for a home run. Lord's team won. Then the Lord asked Bob if he knew why faith, love, and godly wisdom could get on base, but they couldn't win the game. And Bob answered he didn't know why. The Lord explained, if your love and faith and godly wisdom had won the game, you would think you'd done it by yourself. Love, faith, and wisdom will get you on base, but only my grace can get you home. My grace is the one thing Satan can never steal. Amen.